This is the High-Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. I'm Eric Balkman from the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Hour and the FFPC. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Balkman and the FFPC on Twitter at FFPC. Before we get into the show, I want to remind everyone that you can get a listeners-only 10% discount to RotoViz by using the code RVRadio2022. That's RVRADIO2022. Your subscription gives you unlimited access to all of the RotoViz content and tools, and it supports the podcast channel. Now, without further ado, here's the latest edition of the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown. Happy December 26th, Boxing Day for those viewers in Canada, December 26, 2023, as we are into championship week of the FFPC main event in the Fantasy Pros Championship. Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Balkman. You follow me on the X at Eric Balkman. You know me from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the Better Sports Network High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, and of course, the Fantasy Football Players Championship, the FFPC. And by the way, when you go to myffpc.com, you can play in the FFPC Week 16, Week 17 Weekly Challenge. There's no draft or salary cap. You just choose the 10 players or 12 players that you want by Thursday, Saturday, or Sunday's kickoff. 3 separate challenges. And then you can watch the points pile up through the weekend's games. Remember, only 1 player per NFL team. So no draft, no salary cap, but you can't do any stacking. You have to pick 1 player, or you can only pick 1 player per NFL team. You can enter for $35. You can enter for $200. You can win up to $2,500. And don't forget, the FFPC Playoff Challenge is here as well. myffpc.com, myffpc.com is where to go. 2 great contests for this. It's the same awesome format that I basically just described, except instead of picking for a week's worth of games, you are picking for the entire postseason's worth of games. Now, we don't know the postseason combatants yet, but we do know that you can register right now at myffpc.com. And once that postseason schedule is live, you'll be able to pick your players from that. 1 player per team, 12 players for the entire postseason. You don't switch it up. You don't trade them out or get new players after the wild card weekend or divisional playoff. You basically lock them in by that kickoff of that first wild card weekend game, and then that's it. You can enter for $200. You can enter for $35. If you enter for $35, you can win the $100,000 grand prize. If you enter for $200, you could win the $500,000 grand prize. myffpc.com is where to go for that. Remember to like, subscribe, comment, share this video with your friends and enemies, and get notified every time we go live by clicking on that notification bell on the video itself. Tonight, I'm pleased to welcome back onto the show the 9th place team owner in the Fantasy Pros Championship. He is chasing a $1 million grand prize in that contest. He's also got a team in the championship round of the FFPC main event, a guy who I don't even know how many dozens, maybe even hundreds at this point, fantasy league titles he has had at the high stakes level before. You follow him on the X machine at Kruse_Brad. Please welcome back onto the show, Brad Kruse, the fantasy assassin himself. Brad, happy holidays to you. Thank you for coming on the show tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Always a pleasure to have you on. How was the Christmas for you? What was Christmas good? Did you do anything? Was it taxing watching so many football games? Like we had Thursday night, we had Saturday, we had Sunday, we had Monday night. Had to be a crazy Christmas season for you.
Yeah, of course, we had 30-some family members all together, and that's always fantastic. And so not as much football watching as a normal weekend, but definitely scrolling through the scoreboard or an ESPN on my phone.
What's that like when you're entertaining all these guests and hanging out with family, but you're still like, my God, I'm floating around the top 10 for $1 million here this weekend. What's that like?
I mean, you'd be surprised. A bunch of family members are into fantasy football,
right.
So everyone else is checking in too. And everyone's very interested, since we play a lot of high stakes leagues, how we're doing. We're always like, we're not going to know for 2 weeks. All the money goes, and after week 17. So we just have to wait. And not everyone understands that, but that's the truth.
It is the truth, and it's just what we deal with. It's something that's going to be fun frustrating. I know this was a frustrating weekend for me, but I'm excited to see how week 17 unfolds. And speaking of week 17, in this episode tonight, we're going to try to point out the reasons for drafting with the FFPC main event Fantasy Pros Championship round in mind, why we should have seen, or maybe should not have seen, Trey McBride coming this past summer during drafting season. We're going to try to help you to perfect those championship week lineups and much more tonight. That's all on the show. So let's get into it, Brad, right away. I want to ask you here, 9th place in the Fantasy Pros Championship, just 1 week to go, 8 teams separating you from that $1 million grand prize. You look at this team that's in 9th place right now, man. How do you like your chances?
Well, of course, our chancing for finishing first and taking down the $1 million, it's a long shot, right? We've got to climb over 8 teams. We got to make up a deficit. So, it's certainly no one would predict that to happen, but it feels good to be in the top 10 and watch this unfold this coming weekend, hoping for the miracle. We should land in the money somewhere. But of course, the prize money drops real quick. So it's not likely to be life-changing money, but it's going to be fun.
It's going to be fun. How do you plan on spending week 17? What are you going to be doing? Because this is New Year's weekend.
I will be glued in front of the TV watching the games, unless early on I'm knocked out. But if early on we get some momentum going, we'll be watching every minute.
Are you in line? I mean, you're probably in line for some serious cash in a bunch of leagues this year, right?
We are in line in some cash when you look across all the formats. It's really good. We had a tough week 13, which knocked us out of 3 of the 4 auctions that we all were. We were actually top 3. Each of our auction teams were top 3 scoring teams in the league. But week 13 laid an egg, so we didn't advance into the finals. So we were in the semifinals, but not the finals.
What was it about? Was it your players that didn't perform in week 13? Were you up against some
we had some injuries for Madre Stevenson, Tank Dell. There were like 3 guys who were popular on our teams that that just gave us single digit numbers because of injuries and got in first quarter, second quarter type of thing. And when we needed them to be a top 2 finisher in a 4-team playoff for the finals, didn't happen for us. So that's the way it happens.
Yeah, that is the way it happens. I had a really tough week 16. Now, I wouldn't say that it was an injury thing for me. My guys just sucked, in a lot of leagues, and that happens. It stinks when it happens at this time of year. But it's always a possibility. When you were drafting this specific team, Brad, back in was this early September? Was this an early September draft?
I probably late August.
Late August. Okay. So when you were drafting this team, and I guess not just limited to this team, let's expand upon it when you're drafting teams in general. How much of an eye do you have on weeks 15 to 17? Is there something to be garnered from drafting based on the championship round schedule? Or is there just too much football that goes on to really ascertain any kind of meaningful data that that this guy is the right pick here over this guy? Do you ever look at the championship round when you're drafting your squads?
Yes. So simple answer, but yes. The deeper explanation is, as my brothers and I prepared, there was so much focus on stacking for weeks 15 to 17. That's what matters. No one cares about the opening schedule anymore. Everybody's looking to stack week 17 or 15 to 17, and especially in best ball tournaments. So we went into that problem skeptical. We stacked a little bit last year, but really wasn't a forethought to do deep and multiple stacks. This year dug into a lot more history, read all the articles on why you stack and the advantage it gives you. But thanks to Fantasy Mojos and RotoViz tools and data, we tried to figure out what is the value of stacking. And so we came away saying, we want to try this a little bit more this year, but we don't want to reach for it, right? And we were definitely trying to stack QBs that already had the elite prospects in it versus the other way around. Grab the QB first and then populate his weapons. So that was kind of our focus. And when I looked at the Steve Kerr League, I think we had Amon Ross, St. Brown, and later Brandon Cooks and Jared Goff. So for week 17, we had an elite receiver, his quarterback, and bring back player in Brandon Cooks as an opponent. So if that's a shootout, maybe they can all go off. That was kind of the logic, and that's how it played out in that draft, even though Jared Goff's no longer with this team.
What about when you talk about stacking? This year, you tried to get the quarterback first and then the pass catcher.
No, other way around. Other way around.
So, okay. So this year, you added the quarterback later, right?
Correct.
Okay. So in years past, were you grabbing the quarterback earlier and then filling in with his pass catcher when you stacked?
It certainly teams like the Giants, where Daniel Jones goes, in the middle of the draft, and he had a bunch of pass catchers. You could do that and throw darts, and who knows. But really, what we think is you want the guy who's likely going to blow up, right? So that's the wide receiver one on his team. And then if you get his quarterback that he can drag along with him, it's great. But if you go grab Pat Mahomes, it's not as clear, especially in the summer, who he was going to bring along with him, right? So do you spend 3 or 4 pet draft picks trying to populate them? And let me say a name not named Travis Kelce.
Right. I think, well, let's talk about this Steve Kerr, and this is the team name, Steve Kerr.
Yes.
For anybody who's listening, in the FantasyPros Championship, 9th place overall right now. To me, and let's take stacking out of the equation for the moment as much as we can. Mm-hmm. It seemed to me like when I would talk to high stakes players this summer, or even early September, October, we talk about their drafts. It seemed like a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them put more of an emphasis on drafting quarterbacks a little bit higher this year than they had in previous years. And this is, single quarterback leagues. It's not like we're talking Superflex here.
Sure.
In this specific league, round 12 is when you ended up taking quarterbacks. You went boom, boom, boom. Daniel Jones in the 12th, Jared Goff in the 13th, Kenny Pickett in the 14th. I know you alluded to Goff already. Why specifically did you do that in this league? And next year, given the success of this team, are you more than likely to, again, wait on quarterback until, after the 10th round and then form a triumvirate there and try to figure it out from there?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, since we've drafted together and against each other in Kentucky for, 10 years or more now, late round QB has kind of been a tenet of what we do. And it's what happens a lot in Kentucky. And you kind of play chicken at the quarterback position, who will be the last guy to take his quarterback. However, the last couple of years, especially in the best ball slim leagues that FFPC offers, we started to migrate to put a little more higher premium on the quarterbacks. I guess that's also due to the fact that a lot of people were waiting at quarterback so you could get a premium quarterback in round 6 or round 7. And so that started to look like too much value to pass up, because in best ball slim leagues, you can't change your roster. And people tend to want 3 quarterbacks, 3 kickers, 3 all the single positions, which in slims is just quarterbacks. But you only had like 18 roster spots a couple of years ago. So that roster spot cost you a lot. And you wanted to invest it in the more variable positions, which tend to be receiver. So we thought if we could grab a couple of, top 10 round quarterbacks, they aren't likely to lose their job due to skill, right? I mean, everyone's got an injury risk with them, and they have a strong enough ceiling to their performance and a consistent enough performance that getting that third quarterback isn't as advantageous. So we take that roster spot, put it somewhere else. So that got us starting to play a little bit more with the higher end quarterback game. Now in managed leagues, it's not as important, because if a quarterback gets hurt or turns into a dud, you can go roster. Change your direction during the season, roster it. The big advantage I've found over the years is that quarterback, when you draft, so everyone's drafted, so the top 6 to 8 quarterbacks, everyone feels kind of good about, right? So that leaves 4 players who are throwing darts, and they may feel they hit, they may feel they miss, but after 1 or 2 weeks, they're not necessarily saying, barring an injury, their quarterback sucks. So when a quarterback emerges off the wire, you don't have a lot of competition going for that quarterback. So we tend to take a week 1 reveal very seriously at quarterback. And so therefore we're on the CJ Strouds, Baker Mayfields of the world early for cheap money. And then Steve Kerr League, those are our quarterbacks right now. We're riding through the playoffs.
And it makes perfect sense in theory, right? And it certainly has paid off for you this year. How big will it be? A 7-figure payoff? We'll find out this time next week for sure. Trey McBride, let's talk about him. I was looking at some of your teams, and this is like, main event, Fantasy Pros, Best Ball Tournament, everything. It seemed like you had a lot of Trey McBride this year, and I'm certain you're pretty thrilled to get him where you did, given his performance so far this year. What did you see in McBride during drafting season that made you think that, okay, look, this is a guy we got to acquire early and often?
Yes, I was so certain about McBride during this summer. I thought he was a gem in the back third of the draft. My brothers and I prepared. We hashed out a bunch of names like Trey McBride. And, he did well after Ertz went down last year. Mm-hmm. He came in the league with pretty high draft capital and a lot of good thought as he was a rookie last year. But he got stuck behind Ertz. When Ertz went down, he had good connections, but that's when people aren't paying attention so much because, a lot of leagues they're out of. McBride's, maybe locked out of the waivers, whatever. So he didn't have the same pub, and this is a historic rookie tight end class, so he wasn't getting all the hype. So I thought Ertz wouldn't make week one. I thought McBride's going to be the guy. And then when he takes, continues as he left off last year, he's going to be a fixture. Okay, that didn't happen. So when Ertz came back, he was going to be the lead guy. I tapped the brakes a little bit, but always kept that in the back of my mind. And so when Ertz started getting injury a little bit and then went out, we were over McBride. We have him in half our Fantasy Pros leagues. He's our most popular tight end, but we do not have enough of Trey McBride.
Right. Nobody does, right? At this point, like, it's based on how he's been playing. I wish I had more Trey McBride. I mean, I could have him in 70% of leagues. I wish I had more. We got, and this, I know this isn't on the show sheet that I sent over, but more tight end news in the NFL today. TJ Hawkinson tears his ACL, which is brutal. It sucks. Yeah. It stinks. And it's going to affect him for 2024 probably as well. This week, week 17, I remember when the Vikings played the Packers back in late October. And this is a game that, granted, Kirk Cousins was playing, but he did get hurt in this game. And ruptures Achilles, is out for the year. But that game, no Justin Jefferson, and KJ Osborne, Hawkinson had a big game. KJ Osborne had a big game. Jordan Addison had a big game. We don't know if Addison's playing this week. What about KJ Osborne, Brad, this week as a second flex in like the main event or the Fantasy Pros Championship, knowing that the Vikings are not going to be able to literally throw it to Justin Jefferson every play, or maybe they will, who knows? But knowing that Hawkinson is not going to be there, does Osborne strike you as a guy? Because I know he's owned in a lot of leagues, and people are going to have the option to flex him out if they want. Is that getting too cute? I mean, I feel like if you're down in the standings, now's the time to deploy a guy like that. But he had 8 catches for 99 yards the last time he played the Viking, or last time he played Green Bay. And I think there might be something there in week 17.
He, for sure, he's going to be as good a dart throw as anybody. You have to look at your roster. Are you stacked in there? Did the Addison loss hurt you? The Hawkinson loss hurt you? Mm-hmm. Is Jaden Reed going to play? A lot of guys you could be starting. Osborne could certainly step in for you if you've got him.
I think it's going to be interesting, and that's the Sunday night game too. And it's the only, there is no Monday night game this week. So that's going to be interesting to see how people treat that. I know I was going back and forth on the Monday night Christmas Day game between Lamar Jackson and Brock Purdy all the way up to it. And everything in my body said, Brock Purdy's going to blow up, start him. I didn't. I played Lamar Jackson, and I'm thankful. But my God, I don't know what happened with Purdy last night, Brad. Holy cow.
I think the Ravens happened to him.
The Ravens did happen. The Ravens did happen to Brock Purdy last night. You mentioned Jaden Reed, and I think he's been a player that, I don't know if he was – I guess he was drafted in a bunch of leagues, but I know in some of my Kentucky leagues, which you referenced earlier, I picked him up early on in the season. I don't have as much of him as you do. You just told me why you love Trey McBride coming into the season. Why did you want to make sure you got Jaden Reed on so many teams like you did this year?
So growing up in Chicago, it's certainly not possible that I'm a bigger Packer fan than you.
Well, anything's possible. Anything's possible.
Reed is another guy we, my brothers and I, discussed ad nauseum over the summer. And we came to the conclusion, in some point in early August that we liked Jaden Reed over Romeo Doubs. And, you know, a lot of risks with the Packer offense, you know, was Jordan Love going to be able to step in and develop? You know, would Reed as a rookie do well? But he certainly had better draft capital than Doubs. And reading the, you know, the rookie reports from the guys who tape watch, they all really loved Jaden Reed. And he was going 4, 5, 6 rounds later. A lot of times it was 18th round. We could throw darts on him, you know, early in the drafting season. So we early on decided we want to be over market to Jaden Reed. And he has certainly developed from okay, let's not cut him yet, we're showing signs, to, okay, should he be started this week versus whoever else, to now it's tough to take him out of your flex.
Right. Was it a draft capital thing / what he put on tape at Michigan State? Were those the two biggest factors that you're like, okay, there's something here for Jaden Reed in Green Bay?
Yeah, I mean, I don't watch college football myself, so I really dig into, you know, like the rookie scouting portfolio and some of the other tape watching guys to get a read on them, and then review what the analytics guys are saying. And so Jaden Reed kind of stood out to me, and the Packers have hit on a lot of wide receivers in the past. Christian Watson was the big guy from Green Bay in 4th, 5th round draft capital in fantasy drafts, but you know, he's injured a lot last year. You know, there was still some question about him. Romeo Doubs was the darling in the summer last year, but he had some splashes in the summer this year. But I didn't, you know, if they were both rookies, I'd be on Reed. And so I kind of said, look, I think I like Reed better. And then with the discount in the draft capital, certainly heavy on Reed, and we were below market on Doubs.
You know, the thing, and I want to make it seem all about draft capital because it's not. But when you consider that Romeo Doubs was a 4th round pick last year and Jaden Reed was 2 years ago, and then this past year, last year, Doubs in 2022, we'll just say that. In 2022, Doubs was a 4th round pick. In 2023, Jaden Reed was a 2nd round pick, right?
Yeah.
And I think you are this season. Now, I'm not saying this is good. This is how it's going to be for their careers, but you're definitely seeing this season the limitations that Romeo Doubs has as a 4th round pick and the higher ceiling that Jaden Reed has presented as a 2nd round pick. I said, Brad, last month, or maybe it was a month and a half ago, Reed was being used by the Packers in a lot of the same ways that Watson was being used by the Packers last year. Yeah. And when Watson was not available this year, Reed stepped up. And I'll tell you, and as long as we're talking about Packers receivers, what's your opinion on Dontavian Wicks? Because he's been kind of another find for Green Bay.
Yeah, I added him a couple of weeks ago in my Kentucky Dynasty League as a hedge on Jaden Reed's availability on Monday night game, whatever week they had that Monday night game. And he looks good. I've kept him. And then you hear that the coach is saying he sees a lot of Devontae Adams in him. You're like, whoa, that sounds a bit rich, but okay, I'm going to hold on to that guy.
Yeah, and the other thing too with Wicks is, and I said this on the HSFF Hour this past Friday because we were talking about Dontavian Wicks with Farrell Elliott and John Donaldson, and I said this guy's 2022 was unbelievable. He had his 2021 was unbelievable, and if he would have come out then, he probably would have been a 2nd round pick, maybe even a first, borderline 1st round pick. But in 2022. He had a season in which the offense was brand new offensive coordinator, a lot of changes. For whatever reason, he just failed to adapt to that new offense, and he slips until day 3. The Packers, obviously see the raw talent. And I'll say this too, even when he was not performing earlier in the season, he was consistently graded out as the best Packers receiver as far as getting open, his route running ability, like all things that you're like, okay, you can only do this for so long before the ball's going to start finding you. The ball started finding Wicks. I'm with you. In fact, in some of my Kentucky Dynasty leagues, I picked up as Wicks as well. And we'll see what happens in 2024 with them. But things are looking up for the Packers receiver room, something that had a ton of question marks hanging over it coming into this season, no longer in 2024. Let's keep talking about youthful receivers here. And I want to talk about a guy, Brad, with you who had 13 targets last night on Monday Night Football. He had 9 catches, turned it into 72 yards and a touchdown, and that was Zay Flowers. So after what we saw with Zay Flowers on Monday night, How close is he going to be to being a must start against the Miami Dolphins on Sunday? And before you answer that question, I feel like I should bring this up too. When you look at that game, the Ravens and Dolphins, two highly talented offenses and two pretty good defenses as well. But when you consider those offenses, the total on that game, as I look it up right now, between the Ravens and the Dolphins on Sunday, what is that, a 1 p.m. game? Why am I not finding it here? 1 p.m. game. That it has a total of 47 points on that game. How close, Brad, in your opinion, is Zay Flowers to being a must-start player this week in championship week?
Yeah, so when you look at championship week and in the tournament, the sprint, you need big scores. You need a 200. You need a 190. The higher, the better. I think historically, you probably got to average around 190 to cut down the nets. Flowers is starting to show that ceiling, but 20 points in 3 of the last 4 weeks. He hasn't shown that that really big blow-up game, but he's hard to knock out of your flex spot. I mean, he's certainly looking like a starting wide receiver. I think he's top 30 year to date in fantasy points. So he's going to finish the year strong. He's going to be a player a lot of people like next year.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder. I'm like, is Zay Flowers pricing himself out of where I'm comfortable drafting him next year? We're going to have drafts going on with the FFPC probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks or so. And it'll be very interesting to see where Zay Flowers is going in those drafts. Week 15, so the week before, he only had 2 targets, 1 catch for 7 yards.
Yeah.
But he had 9 catches, 6 catches, and 5 catches in the 3 weeks before that. This is a guy, and quite frankly, I mean, like, dude, in his first NFL game, 9 catches for 78 yards. And then he gets 2 carries in that game too. He is a player that has been putting up numbers all season long. 74 catches, 750 yards. He's been in the end zone 5 times if you include rushing too. It's going to be wild to see where Zay Flowers is drafted next year. But yeah, it's going to be, I'm with you, Brad, really, really tough to, when you're looking for spike level games in week 17, really, really tough to sit a guy like Zay Flowers. Conversely,
Baltimore lost Keaton Mitchell too. So
right.
It could be that they're leveraging more on Flowers to help overcome that explosion lost.
And it would make sense from a tactical standpoint for Baltimore, to incorporate Flowers more into that Keaton Mitchell role. Keaton Mitchell, I feel like they weren't always really using him as a running back, in quotes, for if you're listening to the audio version later. They weren't using him as a running back. It's more like kind of a weapon and definitely a threat in the receiving game too. Zay Flowers really, really looking good. If you got him in Dynasty, things are looking up there as well. A player that I think bottom out is a proper term here for Davante Adams. Christmas Day against the Kansas City Chiefs. That dude ended up, and the Raiders won that game, and it was on the strength of their defense, which I can't believe I'm saying the Raiders defense ended up being the reason they beat the Chiefs in Arrowhead, but that's what happened. He had his worst performance as a Las Vegas Raider for sure this season. He had 1 catch for 11 yards back in week 8 at Detroit. He gets 1 catch for 4 yards on Christmas Day, Brad. 6 targets, 1 catch, 4 yards. Yep. I know we don't want to get too cute here. Like, you're trying to win $1 million. If you are in the thick of things to try to win the 7-figure grand prize in the FFPC main event or the FantasyPros Championship, I think you've dragged Davante Adams to that spot. He has not raised up your team to get you to this spot. Is it too cute to think about benching him against Indianapolis this week? He is the type of player, he had the 1 catch for 4 yards this past week. The week before, he gets 8 catches for 101 yards and a touchdown. So that's what you're dealing with if you decide to bench him this week. But is it the right call to bench him at Indianapolis?
Yeah, so Davante Adams, kind of a sore spot. If you looked at the draft board, you had this little asterisk by his name.
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, means
got
auto-picked. Mm-hmm. I remember when it happened, we were trying to get Andrews logged up. So it was kind of one of those where we were counting on a different player to be there. He wasn't there. Then we started debating. We just didn't execute the Andrews pick in time. And then we kind of said, well, okay, gets us off of 0 shares of Davante Adams. It might not be a bad thing. Now, Andrews, of course, is out for the year, so it's
He's
not like
out,
he'd be
yeah.
helping us, right?
Right.
But little do we know, in week 16, Adams throws the stinker in.
Yeah.
I don't think you can bench him because he's got, a couple of 30-point games this year. You're looking for guys who can do that. I don't think we've got the depth on the bench to say we can replace his ceiling, but we'll look at that this weekend.
The other thing I noticed when I was looking at this Steve Kerr team in 9th place in the Fantasy Pros Championship, I was looking at your waiver bids, and I noticed that you bid on Puka Nacua before his big week 1. And I'm like, oh my God, think about how great this team would be if they would have had Puka Nacua on it. And then I kept scrolling down. I'm like, oh, wait, they got him the following week. You guys it cost you $458 instead of $1. So God knows what you could have done with that money, but you still ended up getting Nacua on this team, which is very, very good.
So my brother and I, we draft teams separately, and then we kind of manage
them together. This is Tim, right? Are you talking about Tim?
This is my brother Tim. Yeah, you're right.
Okay,
we have another brother involved, which is Bob.
Mm-hmm.
So Tim was managing this team, so I gave him the whole credit for Puka. Puka was being drafted in Vegas, of course, right?
Yep.
He went hard on Puka and all the waiver wires because he really believed in him. And so we have a lot of Puka on leagues where he didn't get drafted. So I was managing the main events where he was all drafted, so he wasn't up there. But Fantasy Pros where we didn't draft him, the later ones, we went hard after him in the waiver wire. And it's a kind of a running debate with us. He loves to spend his money early in drafts. I tend to be a little bit more cautious and have more money at the difference-making player at the end of the season. Mm-hmm. And this year it looked like, especially in Fantasy Pros, where you could get the Kyron Williams and the Puka Nacuas, we have a lot of those guys.
And kudos to Sean McVay. I've been saying this all year. Kyron Williams, a guy who, I still don't know how he's doing it, Brad. He's just a good football player. His metrics are bad. He bombed out at the combine. The only reason I was drafting him, I'll tell you this, Kentucky weekend, when I was doing most of my drafting in Louisville, I saw a blurb, I think it was on Roto World, talking about, and it was some Rams beat writer saying that Kyron Williams in practice was actually more involved than Cam Akers was as a pass catcher. And I'm like, oh, perfect. You get to the 13th, 14th, 15th round or whatever, and you're looking for these injury away type running backs. Kyron Williams he is a perfect option.
Yeah.
Never would have thought that what I'm seeing right now from Kyron Williams. I also can't remember a time, and I'm sure you'll be able to rattle some off, or maybe you won't. I don't know. But a receiver in Puka Nacua who was a day 3 choice coming into a team that had target hog Cooper Kupp, an established tight end in Tyler Higbee. I can't remember. I mean, this guy is 147 yards away from the rookie record for most receiving yards by a rookie pass catcher. It just blows me away. I can't remember a time where a day 3 rookie has made this kind of an impact before. And the fact that Kyron Williams and Puka Nacua are on the same team blows my mind even more. I can't explain it. I don't know how they're pulling this off in Los Angeles.
This is a franchise who hasn't had a first-round pick in a decade or something.
Right. Yeah.
So they've needed to hit these guys later in drafts, and they have. You were talking about Romeo Dobbs draft capital versus Jaden Reed. So this is an example of Puka Nacua draft capital didn't matter.
No.
And you're like, how did the league miss this guy? Who knows?
How did they indeed? I have no idea. And there were some guys out there, Thor Nystrom, I know from Fantasy Pros, Derek Brown from Fantasy Pros. These guys were talking up Puka Nacua in prior to the NFL draft. And I grabbed them in a 4th round pick in rookie drafts. These guys like him. We'll see what I have.
Yeah.
No feelings on anybody in the 4th round. And now I love it. It's been fantastic to get those guys on my team. Let's talk about a question from the YouTube chat. John Terry, a long time friend of the show, guy who's been on this program before. Injuries and waivers locking have caused him to fall to the 21st place in the FFPC main event. He has to start either Elijah Moore or Devontae Parker this week. Elijah Moore is Thursday night at home against the New York Jets. Devontae Parker hits the road to take on the Buffalo Bills. Brad, if you had to pick one of these guys for week 17, given it's an FFPC main event, he's got to leap over 20 teams and still keep everybody else behind him. Who is the player that you would start here between these two guys?
Can you count the Elijah Moore as a revenge game?
Yes, you 100% can. I didn't even notice that till now. That's a total revenge game. Okay,
So
I think we've made our decision here.
I guess the bull on Elijah, the bull case for Elijah Moore is Sauce is probably going to be covering Cooper. But he still gets another great corner. I forget the corner's name there, but they're both fantastic. Whereas Parker, boy, I don't like these options.
I don't think John Terry likes him either.
Yeah, I think I'd lean Parker just because Flacco has eyes for Cooper so much. I mean, I don't know that he even knows Elijah Moore's on the field.
The other corner is DJ Reed.
Yes,
for the New York Jets. So that's probably who will be on Elijah Moore. Week 16 was not kind to Elijah Moore. 2 catches for 19 yards. And Joe Flacco, by the way, has been launching like 40-plus passes every single week. So for Moore to catch 2 in week 16, and this wasn't a 1-week thing, he catches 2 for 17 in week 15, 3 catches for 42 yards in week 14. And then I believe the first week he had with Flacco against the Rams, 4 catches for 83 yards. This is a guy that was his highest receiving total all season, was 83 yards. He had 9 catches, beg your pardon, in a 27-3 loss against the Titans in week 3, but that was only 49 yards. I'm not seeing a ton of upside with Elijah Moore, despite what we have seen from Joe Flacco rejuvenating that passing offense.
And Flacco and Elijah Moore did well together with the Jets, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It's interesting that everything is Cooper now.
Yeah. 4 catches for 65, 5 for 44, 4 for 64 for Devontae Parker in his last 3 games. So I think the upside, I mean, there's not a ton from either one of these guys. I think I'm with you. I would lean towards Parker, but it's close. So John, hopefully that helps you out. Bill Hollywood also in the chat right now in the YouTube chat, also saying Devontae Parker is his choice as well.
All right.
Isaiah Pacheco is dealing with a concussion. It's going to be very difficult for him to come back from a Monday afternoon game, to be able to play on Sunday in the concussion protocol. Not impossible, but unlikely. So for the sake of this conversation, let's say he is not cleared to play, and let's say it is Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the backfield for the Kansas City Chiefs this week. He gets the Cincinnati Bengals. This is a game that a lot of best ball players had marked on their calendars. Week 17, Chiefs, Bengals. Well, it is not exactly the Chiefs and Bengals that we thought were going to be duking it out in week 17. The total on this game is 44.5. This is a positive game script for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Chiefs are a 7-point favorite in this game. Would you recommend him as a flex this week, or is that too dangerous here, Brad?
Well, I mean, it all depends on the other options, but he's certainly a viable starter. Because 2 weeks ago he had 20 points. I mean,
yeah, I'm looking it up right now, but I think that sounds right.
I'd be higher on him if the Chiefs could move the ball these days.
Right. Because
any running back can fall into the end zone from the goal line. You're not doing any tush pushes with Pat Mahomes. So I mean, Clyde's viable, but just kind of depends if he's pushed onto flexes, you've got much stronger running backs, then he's going to have to compete with some probably strong receivers. But
he had 4 carries for 6 yards this past week. And I think I don't want to see you throw that out the window, but remember that the Chiefs were just trying to get any kind of offense going, especially when the Raiders had those back-to-back defensive touchdowns.
Right.
To your point, 2 weeks ago against the Patriots, 13 carries, 37 yards. He also had 4 catches for 64 yards and a touchdown in that game. And the week before, he also had 4 catches, 39 yards on the ground. He's doing the Lord's work for the Chiefs. Whether he does it again against the Cincinnati Bengals remains to be seen. I'm with you. Depends upon your other options, but I think that there is something there as a second flex for you in the FFPC main event or the Fantasy Pros Championship. Bill Hollywood is firing up Clyde all the way. So there you go. Right. Bill Hollywood high on Clyde Edwards-Helaire this week. I incorporate your 9th place team into this question, if you will, or any of your big money leagues that you're looking at trying to win some serious cash this week, Brad. What's the toughest lineup decision or decisions you're facing in week 17 as it stands right now?
So, a lot of the decisions in recent weeks has been Rashee Rice versus Jaden Reed as, the final flex plays, and both have been pretty good. Now, Reed being out last week made that easy. But I tell you, the one league that's just been a killer emotionally for me all year has been varsity. We've got Bijan Robinson, Tony Pollard, Aaron Jones, Jonathan Taylor, and Jalen Warren. 5 running backs who you think could fill two RB and 2 flex positions pretty well. Never have. We have Laporta and McBride at tight end. So one of them wants to claim a flex position.
Yeah.
And then we've got Debo, Chris Godwin, Jaden Reed, and Jordan Addison, of course, is now out. That's just been a brutal league, and we never find the right guys. And because of that, we're going to wind up out of the money.
That's tough. It's so tough, right?
Yeah.
So frustrating, because for a best ball team, that's amazing.
Right.
And when you have to actually pick the players in that format, it's mind numbing, because oftentimes, like Dave the Dizzle Gerzak always said this, you're usually not going to pick your optimal lineup. It's so tough to do. And the NFL is a funny game, and it's tough to do that. And at least, well, I mean, it stinks that you're going to finish out of the money with such a talented team. One of the running backs that you mentioned on that team, Brad, was Jalen Warren. And if memory serves me, don't you have a lot of shares of Jalen Warren this year? Why were you high on him?
Well, I mean, we felt last year that, he was going to, fantasy-wise, be somewhat equivalent to Najee Harris, who went, 7 rounds, 8 rounds earlier than him. So we thought it was a no-brainer pick, and great contingent upside if Najee Harris were to go down. So he was definitely a target for us in the 9th, 10th round. And then before they fired Canada, Warren started getting the start, and he started putting together a couple of 2, maybe 3 20-point weeks together. And we're like, okay, now he's showing the ceiling that we can be more confident to make decisions with him. But then the OC change that everyone cheered, and it's been Najee Harris show. Now it's like a 2/3, 1/3 instead of a 50-50 split. So he's kind of fallen off the last 3, 4, 5 weeks. But yeah, he was certainly one of our very popular, especially from a 0 RB standpoint, because he could give us both the playability and the contingent upside that we were looking for.
Yeah, and I think that was the thing for me, because I have Warren on a few teams, not as many as you, but like the thing that intrigued me about Warren is I felt like, given what he represented for the Steelers and given his talent level and how the Steelers used him, I felt like he should have been going higher in drafts. And to me, he always seemed like a bargain every time it would come to me. Like, Warren's still out there again. I should probably grab him. And it was usually like my 4th running back or something like that. But these pay off. These guys can pay off. And when you draft a guy like Warren, and I say this all the time, he doesn't have to hit every single week for you, but if you can use him in the right spot, and when he is successful or when he's getting the opportunity, it makes a lot of sense to get Warren on your team.
And if Pickens had just blocked for him a week ago, then he'd had a touchdown, right?
He would have, yeah. But Pickens is another guy too that I'm done trying to figure him out. I had him benched in every league possible known to man this past week, and I'm watching him just run past the Bengals defense on not 1, but 2 occasions. Only catches 4 balls, but he gets the better part of 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. That was frustrating as well. It was a frustrating week 16. Very frustrating week 16.
Yes, it was.
Let's wrap this up.
Okay.
Week 17, Brad, championship week. All the money is going to be doled out this week. Everything is magnified to the nth degree for lineup decisions and trying to figure out the right guys to get in your lineup. So let's frame the question this way. We've talked about some players already that may or may not be in your lineups. Talk about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You talked about the Rashee Rice versus Jaden Reed decision that you've had, facing in a lot of your leagues this year. Devontae Adams, we considered benching him, but you probably can't afford to, as you said. A sleeper that not a lot of people are going to be playing this week that you think could be in for a big game, especially if you're trying to get by a few dozen people on the leaderboard to get up to number 1 or a few hundred, whatever it is. And then conversely, a player that you think a lot of FFPC players are going to be starting this week that you are very nervous about for his performance in week 17.
Okay. So since we talked a lot about Zay Flowers, I'll disqualify him to be the sleeper answer. So I'll go with a couple. Ones might not sound so sleeperish, but he might have kind of fallen on your mind in Nico Collins.
Sure.
He's back. CJ Stroud is back. He should be in a great spot against Tennessee. And then if that's not sleeper enough, maybe it's his teammate Noah Brown.
Ooh, now that's spicy. Noah Brown. This is interesting. Noah Brown, let's just look at this for a second. So you mentioned at home against the Titans this week are the Texans. Noah Brown this past week, only 3 for 38. He did see 7 targets. And that was with what's his name at quarterback? Why am I
Case Keenum?
Case Keenum. Davis Mills. God. Case Keenum. That should go up with CJ Stroud. And bear in mind, this is a dude who has gotten already this season 6 catches for 153 yards, and he had a 7 catch for 172-yard week. So I think that's spicy. That's a spicy choice for Noah Brown. Not a lot of people are going to think about it. It's CJ Stroud, Nico Collins. No Tank Dell this week. Noah Brown. That could be very interesting. What about a player that you're nervous about for week 17?
A nervous must start. I guess likening back to my varsity conversation, I don't know how you can not be nervous about starting Bijan Robinson. How do you sit him? I mean, he's facing a vastly improved Bears team and his own coach to get, plays called for him. So I think you got to start him because he's such a talented guy and can catch 6 balls and do all that kind of stuff. But I've been nervous starting him all year long. So why wouldn't I be nervous this week?
Do you want to take a guess, Brad? Maybe you already know this. How many catches does Bijan Robinson have on the season?
Oh, God.
Take a guess.
40?
He has 48 on the season. Okay. So that's an interesting guess or a very good guess. And I think what's interesting about that is we have been lamenting Arthur Smith and how it affects Bijan Robinson all season. This is a down year from what a lot of people expect. I mean, Bijan Robinson was like a first-round pick this year.
Oh, absolutely.
And the dude is 127 yards away from a 1,000-yard season, which you say 1,000 yards, big deal. Well, in today's NFL, in the last few years, 1,000 yards has not been it's not been easy to get for a lot of running backs. Right. So he's only 127 yards away from that, 48 catches, and he's 27 yards away from a 400 receiving yard season, and he's gotten into the end zone 7 times. Imagine if he had a coach that was going out of his way to get him involved in the game plan rather than going out of his way to get guys like Michael Pruitt and who's the other tight end there? Jonnu Smith and Tyler Algier, for God's sake, this past week.
And Cordarrelle Patterson.
And Cordarrelle Patterson. Oh, God, the list goes on.
He was lead blocking for Cordarrelle Patterson on his touchdown.
The worst thing that can happen is the Falcons making the playoffs. Because if the Falcons make the playoffs, that for sure tacks on one more year of Arthur Smith and maybe more after that. But yeah, I'd be nervous about Robinson. And to your point in varsity, has he been a bench for you, or you guys are just like, look, we can't do it. We're not strong enough to bench Bijan Robinson because of his high floor. Have you been playing him in varsity most weeks?
We've been playing him, but he certainly gave me a freaking headache that one week.
He had a headache himself that one week too.
Yeah,
and
that's what I'm told.
Yeah,
but yet they played him in the second half. It's like, okay, if he's sick, why are you playing him?
Sometimes I think Arthur Smith, and I don't know Arthur Smith. I've never met him. I'm sure he's a fine man, but sometimes I think he goes out of his way to show how smart he is by not really showing us how smart he is, if that makes sense.
He loves Tyler Algier.
He loves Tyler Algier. He's a big fan of him and Jonnu Smith. You give him those guys. I mean, thank God he's not the GM, because he would have traded Pitts, he would have traded Robinson by now, or he never would have drafted him. I think that's entirely possible. Wow, what a fun almost hour it was, Brad. I feel like we are smarter for it. I feel like I'm more dialed in on some of my lineup decisions, thanks to you this week. I know you said it's a long shot to win the Millie, but 9th place right now, only 8 teams separating you 1 week. If you put up a 190 or 200, who knows, right? It could happen for you. We're rooting for you to win it. And if you do, we'll definitely have you back on the show so you can tell us all about it. And then, of course, tell us how you're spending that $1 million, which is what everybody will want to know. I certainly appreciate you carving some time out of your busy schedule on this Tuesday. Good luck in week 17. Enjoy it. And may the ball bounce your way to a lot of a big windfall. We'll call it at that. A big windfall in week 17, Brett.
Well, we will certainly celebrate it if we take it down, and I appreciate it.
You got it. We'll see you soon, Brad. Be good.
All right, you too. Thanks.
Later on, that is the fantasy assassin himself, Brad Kruse, joining me on the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown this week. Such a fun guy to talk fantasy with. And I think, like I said, I think we learned a lot tonight. I think we have really figured out what to do with week 17. In case that is not enough, don't worry. We got 2 more shows for you this week. Number 1, this show will be live again next Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern time. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show will go live Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time on the Better Sports Network, the Better Sports Network socials, and of course the FFPC socials. It'll be myself and Nate Polvo from Fantasy Pros will be my guest co-host. He returns to that show, and we'll lead you right into Thursday Night Football, Jets and Browns. We'll actually watch the first quarter with you before we turn things over to the best of the Better Sports Network after that. High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, then live Friday night at 10 p.m. Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship Commissioner Farrell Elliott and myself with a special guest. That gets underway at 10 p.m. on Friday. Remember to go to myffpc.com, play in the FFPC Weekly Challenge. There is no draft. There is no salary cap. You can play with or without kickers and defenses. Remember, we have the Thursday Challenge, the Saturday Challenge, and the Sunday Challenge. 3 separate challenges this week that you can join. Just get your lineups in for that. 1 player per team, per NFL team, and watch the points pile up. $35 to enter, $200 to enter as well, and you win up to $2,500. The same format as the FFPC Playoff Challenge. 2 great contests in there. We have a $35 entry fee contest and a $200 entry fee contest. You can win $500,000 in the $200 one. You can win $100,000 in the $35 one. No draft or salary cap. You're choosing 12 players for the entire postseason. Get your registrations in now. They're going to go fast and furious after the NFL season ends, so make sure you get your entries earmarked now, and then you can start building your teams after the conclusion of Week 18. Remember to like, subscribe, comment, share, and get notified. And I'll tell you this right now, there's a talk in the chat room right now, Bill Hollywood. He wants to know, does this show go all year? Well, the answer is sort of. During the season, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown will go live every Tuesday night at 10 p.m. During the off season, basically, I think our last weekly show is prior to the divisional playoff weekend in the FFPC. Then we will sort of take a break, but not really. We'll still go live once a month. It'll be the first Tuesday of every month up until the start of the 2024 NFL season. So we'll go live, the first week of, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, and then September, we'll go back to weekly again. That is the schedule for the show. So if you are watching and you're wondering, now you know. And thank you, Bill Hollywood, for that question. Whew. All right. Like, subscribe, comment, share, and get notified. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you on Thursday night. And Happy New Year, everybody. We appreciate you watching. Thank you for listening to the High Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. And thanks to Grapes for our theme music. Please review the podcast on iTunes under the RotoViz radio feed. It helps us find new listeners. Contact us via email, rotovizradio@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think, and follow us on Twitter at RotoVizRadio. And remember, you can always support the show by subscribing to RotoViz at a 10% discount through the NFL podcast homepage, rotoviz.com/podcast.